He pretended to be broke. Until I found his hidden bank accounts. I still remember the jolt of shock when I opened that nondescript folder, expecting nothing more than routine paperwork. Instead, I stumbled upon documents revealing multiple hidden bank accounts belonging to the very man who'd spent the last year pleading hardship and borrowing money from me at every turn. We'd been together for 4 years, and in all that time, he'd spun stories of financial ruin and family debt so convincingly that I never questioned him. Of course, I believed him. Love has a way of blinding us to the most glaring red flags. I'm Delilah, and I'd always trusted my partner until this very moment. Suddenly, every tearful appeal he'd made for help paying bills or covering unexpected emergencies felt like a rehearsed con. And it wasn't just about the money. It was the betrayal, the lies, the manipulation. I was furious with myself for not seeing the signs sooner, the urgent requests for loans that he never paid back, the excuses that kept piling up, and the occasional slip of his tongue that I foolishly overlooked. As I leafed through account statements showing thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars squirreled away, a tightness in my chest took hold. My anger mingled with heartbreak, forging a resolve I hadn't known I was capable of. This wasn't just about my financial loss, it was about exposing the truth he had fought so hard to keep hidden. My name is Delilah, and for most of my life, I prided myself on being a generous, open-hearted person. I grew up in a small coastal town where neighbors shared sugar, babysat each other's kids, and celebrated milestones like one big family. My parents owned a modest diner that was open from dawn to dusk, and I spent my teenage years waiting tables and doing homework at a corner booth under the warm glow of vintage lamps. I learned early on that life was never just about you, it was about caring for those around you, even when it stretched your resources thin. Perhaps that's why it felt natural to open my home to my partner, Seth, when he claimed his business went under. Seth and I met at a mutual friend's birthday party 3 years ago, and I was instantly drawn to his easy smile and the way he seemed to genuinely listen when I spoke. He had a quiet confidence about him, one that suggested he could weather any storm. Even after we started dating, I never once suspected he might be keeping secrets. After all, my parents raised me to trust first, unless given a reason not to. When Seth moved in, I was still working at a local marketing firm, a stable job that allowed me to make ends meet comfortably. I wasn't rolling in money, but between my salary and occasional freelance gigs, I felt secure. Seth, on the other hand, told me he came from a family with deep-rooted financial obligations. He'd mention his father's failing business, unpaid medical bills for a distant relative, or a friend in crisis who he couldn't bear to abandon. Each time he recounted another misfortune, my heart would ache for him. It made perfect sense that he appeared to be stretched so thin, he was always helping someone else out, or so he said. We settled into a routine that, at first glance, looked like any normal couple's life together. We split chores. I would cook while Seth did the dishes, he'd fix the squeaky door hinge while I tidied our living space. On weekends, we'd go to a local flea market, browse second-hand books, or just watch movies at home with a big bowl of popcorn. To the outside world, and in my own eyes, we were just two people building a life together. Underneath that peaceful exterior, though, I started noticing small inconsistencies. He once told me he had absolutely no savings left, yet he managed to surprise me with a fancy dinner for our anniversary. Another time, he claimed he couldn't afford a new pair of shoes, but I found a receipt for an expensive gadget buried in the trash. I chalked it up to him having the occasional windfall, or maybe he was just a poor budgeter. After all, nobody's perfect, and love makes you want to give people the benefit of the doubt. Especially when that person seems so earnest. Still, these little discrepancies left a subtle, nagging doubt in the back of my mind. I pushed it aside, telling myself not to pry. I didn't want to seem untrusting, especially given how much I valued honesty in a relationship. Yet I couldn't shake the sense that something bigger was lurking behind these odd moments. It was like seeing the faint outline of a picture but not knowing what the final image would reveal. Looking back now, I realize those tiny hints were pieces of a puzzle I wasn't ready to solve. I had no idea how drastically my life was about to change, or how heartbreak and outrage could coexist when the truth finally emerged. Soon after Seth moved in, the first unsettling incident surfaced. He had just finished regaling me with yet another tale of overdue bills and crippling debts when the phone rang. Usually, Seth would snatch up his phone before I could even glance at the caller ID, but that day, he was in the shower. I saw the name Evergreen Collections flash on the screen and felt a jab of worry. Thinking it could be important, I answered. The woman on the other end asked for Seth, her tone clipped. She said he was 3 months behind on payments for a car loan. Confused, I told her there must be some mistake. Seth had never mentioned any loan, let alone a car we didn't own. The woman insisted the matter was urgent, then ended the call abruptly, leaving me with a sick feeling in my stomach. When I confronted Seth later, he looked utterly panicked. He claimed the debt was from years ago, for a car his father had co-signed. It's a mix-up, he said, gripping my hands in reassurance. I'm trying to resolve it quietly so Dad doesn't stress. He explained so detailed, complete with dates, conversations with a loan officer, and references to his father's ill health, that I found it hard not to believe him. Still, an odd tension flickered in his eyes. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, and I convinced myself I must have imagined it. Days turned into weeks, and little disruptions kept cropping up like weeds. One Saturday, I caught him rifling through my purse, apparently looking for my checkbook. He claimed he needed it to write a friendly loan check for a buddy in distress. At the moment, I was too stunned to properly question why he needed my checkbook to help his friend. After he left, I discovered 3 separate checks missing from the back of the book, the stubs unfilled. My suspicions flared, but I reeled myself back, reminding myself how often I'd told Seth that I trusted him. I didn't want to play the role of skeptic if there was an innocent explanation. Maybe he'd already filled out the checks and just forgot to note them. Still, I let a week pass before discreetly checking my bank statement. No checks had been cashed, yet. The anxiety churned inside me, leaving me on edge every time the mail arrived. Meanwhile, Jade's questions grew sharper. Whenever we hung out, she'd casually drop lines like, "Has Seth found stable work yet?" Or, "If he's so broke, why'd he buy that new gaming console?" Each question felt like a jab at the trust I'd built with Seth. I became defensive, even arguing with Jade, something I rarely did. We'd never let men come between our friendship, but Seth was different. I believed his hardships were real, and that Jade's cynicism stemmed from her past of dealing with manipulative exes. I remember snapping at her, "You don't know what he's been through," and she simply shook her head, sadness mingling with frustration in her eyes. Another red flag appeared when Seth announced he'd be traveling out of town to see his mother, who had taken ill. I offered to go with him, but he insisted I stay home and save my energy for work. "It's just going to be a depressing hospital visit," he said, eyes downcast. "I don't want you missing shifts for something that might not even help." Something about his refusal rubbed me the wrong way, but I also felt a pang of guilt. If his mother was truly ill, it made sense to give him space to handle it. He left in a hurry one morning, promising to call daily with updates. But calls came sporadically, often with muffled background noise that sounded nothing like a hospital. Once, I heard what I could have sworn was laughter, and when I asked about it, he said it was just a nurse telling jokes to lighten the mood. By the time he returned, he seemed uneasy. He'd glance at his phone mid-conversation and vanish into the other room to answer it. We also started getting strange mail. A thick envelope arrived addressed to me from a financial institution I'd never heard of. Upon opening it, I realized it contained forms for a joint credit application. My name was typed neatly alongside Seth's. I confronted him immediately, demanding an explanation. He insisted it was a mistake. "I tried applying on my own, but they must have pulled your information because we share an address." My stomach twisted in knots, but his contrite expression was so convincing that I shelved my anger again. Shortly after, we had a run-in with one of Seth's old acquaintances, a guy named Marcus. Marcus spotted us at a coffee shop and approached all smiles. While I stood in line for our drinks, I overheard snippets of their conversation. Marcus said something like, "Heard you're still rolling in it, man. Good to see you." Rolling in it? Seth's face visibly darkened, and he cut the conversation short, pulling me away abruptly. I tried to press him for details later, but he blew up, accusing me of invading his privacy and not trusting him. Our argument escalated to a point where I almost asked him to move out. Yet, somehow, he spun my anger back on me, turning it into a plea for understanding. Don't you see how hard it is for me to fix my financial mess? I'm drowning here, and you're making it harder by questioning every step I take. This cycle, finding something suspicious, confronting Seth, then feeling guilty for even asking, continued for months. With each incident, my anxiety mounted, accompanied by a growing sense that I was walking a tightrope in my own home. Jade stopped inviting me out as much, probably tired of watching me ignore warning signs. My parents, ever supportive, had no idea of the stress swirling beneath the surface. I continued to function, going to work, paying bills, cleaning the house, while internally, I was unraveling. One evening, I came home from work to find Seth hunched over my laptop, quickly slamming it shut when I walked in. His excuse, I was just researching job opportunities, didn't want you to see the company's private forms. Even as my heart pounded, I forced a smile and retreated to the kitchen, silently screaming at myself to piece the puzzle together. But love and loyalty can create a haze of denial, and I simply poured myself a glass of water, fighting the quiver in my hands. Still, the little voice inside me refused to stay silent. It reminded me of Jade's warnings, of the baffling checks, of Marcus's remark, of that car loan call, and especially the suspicious new credit application. Something was very wrong, and with each passing day, Seth's behavior only confirmed it. I just hadn't yet gathered the courage to face the implications head-on. Every incident felt like a thread being pulled from the seams of my relationship, unraveling the comfortable life I thought we had. And with that unraveling came a swirl of determination and dread. If I kept digging, what ugly truth would I finally uncover? The final blow came on a rainy Tuesday evening that started like any other. I was rummaging in the hallway closet, searching for an old photo album, when I found a thin folder tucked behind a stack of shoe boxes. Intrigued, because I typically keep important documents in the filing cabinet, I pulled it out. At first, I assumed it might be some leftover paperwork from Seth's alleged car loan fiasco. But as I flipped it open, a chill washed over me. My eyes landed on a series of bank statements, dozens of them, for multiple accounts at 3 different financial institutions. And the name on each account was unmistakable, Seth McAllister. Each statement listed a comfortable sum, far more than the few dollars Seth claimed he had. Some showed regular deposits of $1,000, $2,000, sometimes more. My mind raced as I tried to reconcile the large balances with the man who constantly begged for rent money, claimed he couldn't afford groceries, or insisted his mother needed hospital fees. The more I read, the more my stomach churned. These accounts weren't just passively sitting, they were growing, fed by regular, hefty deposits. Deposits I suspected had something to do with me, my income, or maybe even lines of credit opened in my name. My heart pounded in my ears as I scanned each page. Month after month, the balances rose steadily, as if carefully cultivated. Every memory of Seth's tearful confessions and urgent pleas for money flickered through my mind like shards of glass. The shock reverberated through my entire body, quickly shifting into burning anger. I felt used, betrayed, humiliated. And heartbreakingly, I realized Jade had been right all along. I clutched the folder to my chest, forced a few calming breaths, and then made a decision. I would confront Seth tonight, and I would not back down. After placing the folder on the coffee table, I dialed Jade's number and told her what I'd found. She arrived within the hour, her face drawn with equal parts fury and concern. Together, we strategized, no more second chances, no more letting him wriggle out with some sob story. I wanted answers, and more than that, I wanted him to see that he couldn't manipulate me any longer. Seth came home in the early evening, drenched in the rain. He shrugged off his coat and froze when he saw Jade and me seated side by side in the living room. The folder rested between us on the table, like an accusation waiting to be read. I noticed his eyes flick to the top page, an account summary from just last month, showing a balance that far exceeded his tall tales of poverty. For a moment, his expression registered pure panic. Then, as always, he tried to mask it with a disarming smile. "Hey, what's going on?" he asked, trying to feign casual confusion. I didn't bother with small talk. Instead, I opened the folder, pulled out the first statement, and held it up. "Care to explain this?" My voice cracked, revealing the swirl of emotion I was feeling: anger, sorrow, disbelief. Seth hesitated. I can explain. It's not what it looks like. Jade's anger surfaced before I could speak again. Then please, enlighten us. Because to me, it looks like you've been hiding multiple accounts while pretending you're broke. He glared at her but then turned his attention back to me. Delilah, I was going to tell you everything, but I was scared. You know the trouble my family's been in. I didn't want you to think I'd lied to you about that. I let out a hollow laugh. But you did lie, Seth. You told me you had no money, that you were drowning in debt, yet these statements prove you have more than enough to cover living expenses, and then some. He tried a new tack: contrition. Please, hear me out. The accounts are mine, yes, but the money isn't entirely for me. Most of it belongs to my father's business partner. I'm just holding it for him. It's a complicated situation, and I was afraid if I told you, you'd assume something shady was going on. He glanced at Jade, then back at me. And clearly, you have. Because it is shady, Jade hissed. Why would a business partner keep money in your accounts? That makes zero sense unless you're hiding something illegal, or you're lying right now. He launched into a rambling defense, piling on details about a dying grandfather's estate, about taxes, about some sort of legal bypass he was doing as a favor. Each sentence contradicted the last, and his voice grew more desperate with every word. I stood up, unable to sit still. I paced in front of him, the folder gripped tightly in my hands. Seth, enough. You've done nothing but spin stories since the day you moved in. I've caught you in lie after lie. I defended you to my closest friend and my family. I gave you my trust, let you into my home, and all this time, you were funneling money into secret accounts. Jade handed me another stack of papers, proof we'd pulled from my laptop history earlier that afternoon, showing he'd applied for even more credit lines in my name. Explain this, Jade pressed. Explain why Delilah's credit score is tanking because of these credit lines she never knew existed. Seth swallowed, his face going pale. I did it for us. I wanted to build a financial cushion so we could be safe. I wasn't going to spend it on myself. I swear. My throat felt like it was on fire. Then why all the secrecy? Why the begging and borrowing for bills and groceries? You forced me to play caretaker while you hoarded funds behind my back. My voice cracked with the weight of my anger and heartbreak. For a split second, I thought I saw genuine remorse flash across Seth's face. But just as quickly, his gaze hardened. Realizing he was cornered, he lashed out. What do you want from me, Delilah? Do you want me to say I'm a monster? Fine. I messed up. But you know what? You're not innocent either. You chose to give me money. You were naive enough to believe every word I said. His words struck like a physical blow. Jade shot to her feet, fury radiating off her. Don't you dare blame her for your con job, she spat. My eyes stung with tears, but my anger kept them from falling. Yes, I was naive, I said quietly, because I believed I was in love with someone honest. But that doesn't excuse your betrayal. Seth squared his shoulders, as if ready to stand his ground. The storm outside raged on, lightning illuminating the tension in the room. For a moment, we simply stared at one another, the silence punctuated only by rain battering the windows. Finally, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. What do you want me to do? He asked, voice trembling between defiance and desperation. Just tell me. I'll fix this. The old me might have softened, might have reached out a trembling hand and offered him yet another chance. But at that moment, I realized the relationship we had was founded on illusions and manipulations. Any sincerity he showed now was too little, too late. Steadying my voice, I said, I want you out. Tonight. Take your things and go. And don't think for a second I won't be contacting a lawyer and a credit protection agency first thing in the morning. He let out a bitter laugh, but he saw no sympathy in my eyes. Finally, he grabbed his coat, yanked a duffel bag from a haul, and tossed in clothes at random. Jade and I stood like sentinels, blocking every attempt he made to turn this confrontation around. In less than an hour, he was gone, the door slamming behind him with a finality that echoed through the room. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at the documents still scattered across the coffee table, the evidence of a betrayal so complete it almost stole my breath. The thunder rumbled, making the windows rattle, but my insides were oddly still. Despite the storm raging outside, and in my heart, I felt an unexpected calm settle over me. I had taken my first step toward reclaiming my life from the man who had pretended to be broke, all the while robbing me of my trust and financial security. And in that singular, tremulous moment, I knew there was no going back. In the days that followed Seth's abrupt exit, the house felt both quieter and heavier. Everywhere I looked, I saw remnants of his presence, a coffee mug with his favorite quote, an old jacket slung over the back of a chair, random receipts that hinted at the life he'd pretended to lead. I boxed up his belongings one by one, tossing each item into a growing pile by the front door. The simple act of removing them felt like peeling away layers of deception, each discarded item a testament to the web of lies I'd unknowingly sheltered. My initial shock gave way to waves of anger and sadness, then a strange numbness I couldn't shake. Even the little things, like hearing the floor creak at night, reminded me he was gone. No more hollow excuses about imaginary bills, no more borrowed checkbooks, no more pretenses. At first, I felt a stab of loss for the relationship I thought we had, the future I believed we were building. But then I remembered how each promise he'd made had turned to dust in my hands. Jade stayed over for a couple of nights, insisting I shouldn't be alone. The two of us spent hours on the phone with credit agencies, banks, and even the police to understand how deep Seth's scheme went. I discovered new lines of credit opened in my name, fraudulent charges that had slipped under my radar, and, most disturbingly, attempts to secure loans using forged documents. The scope of his betrayal was mind-boggling. While I had suspected he was taking advantage of me, I never fathomed the intricate network of deceit he'd constructed. Facing these revelations was grueling. Each time I typed in my social security number to check a new credit report, I braced myself for the worst. Yet, amidst the stress, I felt a growing sense of resolve. Seth's actions forced me to see the cracks in my boundaries and my habit of trusting without reservation. My parents, always supportive, were horrified when they learned the details. They'd raised me to be kind, but they never intended for that kindness to become a weakness. My dad, Greg, put it best when he said, "Generosity doesn't mean letting someone walk all over you. You have to protect yourself, too, honey." One evening, I found myself flipping through old photos of me and Seth at the flea market, at our favorite diner, even at the small family get-together where I'd first introduced him to my parents. He wore that easy smile in every single picture, the same expression that had once convinced me of his sincerity. As I looked closer, I noticed how in nearly every snapshot, his gaze wasn't quite directed at the camera. It was as though he was already looking elsewhere, at his agenda. Surprisingly, I felt a curious mix of relief and sadness. Relief that I was no longer tangled in his lies, and sadness for the illusion I had once believed was real. Sometimes, I caught myself wishing the man he pretended to be had been real, someone worthy of the trust and love I offered so freely. But the truth was undeniable, he'd chosen to manipulate, to con, and to steal from me. Now, I had to pick up the pieces and move on. Financially, I had a mountain to climb. I spent hours on the phone with a lawyer who specialized in identity theft and fraud. The lawyer advised me to gather every piece of evidence, every strange transaction, and every fraudulent account statement to build a case. I also had to file a police report in case Seth tried to open new lines of credit. It was emotionally exhausting, but each document I compiled felt like another step toward regaining control over my life. Emotionally, the fallout was just as challenging. Some days, I woke up furious, other days, I felt an aching loneliness. But through it all, Jade and my parents became my anchors. They reminded me of what I still had, my home, my career, my friendships, and, most importantly, my sense of self-worth. Little by little, I began to see the confrontation not as a moment of devastation but as a crucial turning point. It was as though a veil had been lifted, revealing not only Seth's treachery but also the strength I possessed to stand up for myself, to set boundaries, and to start anew. Piece by piece, I reconstructed my finances and my sense of security. I changed passwords, closed compromised accounts, and set up an appointment with a financial counselor. In parallel, I took time to heal, taking walks by the coast, revisiting childhood memories at my parents' diner, and even rekindling my old hobbies like painting and photography. While the process was slow and sometimes painful, I could feel something shift inside me. In the end, the biggest surprise was the realization that Seth's betrayal, for all its cruelty, had taught me an important lesson about knowing my worth. I could still be generous, still hold on to the values my parents instilled in me, but I would also learn to protect myself. Trust might be a gift I offer, but it would no longer come without discernment. Slowly, I was healing, and with each passing day, I found myself more determined than ever to rebuild my life on my terms. A month later, the formalities of legal paperwork and identity theft reports were mostly behind me. My credit, though bruised, was on the mend with the help of a diligent financial counselor. The police had taken my statement, and while I'd yet to learn whether Seth would face charges, I took comfort knowing I'd done everything possible to protect myself, and others who might fall into his orbit. If he tried to keep the scam going, he'd discover a trail of evidence leading straight back to him. As for me, I stood on the porch of my parents' diner one crisp morning, sipping coffee and letting the aroma of fresh pancakes and bacon swirl around me. The sun was just coming up, turning the sky a soft pink that reminded me of the days before I met Seth, days that felt simpler, lighter. But I wasn't yearning to return to who I used to be. Instead, I felt the stirrings of a new resolve. Yes, I'd been hurt and betrayed, but now I knew I could weather storms and come out stronger on the other side. I moved back into my house, determined to make it a true haven for myself, rather than a cage of doubts and second-guessing. The few friends who'd quietly stepped back during my relationship with Seth returned with supportive words and reassurances that I was still the generous, open-hearted Delilah they'd always known, only now with sharper boundaries. Jade remained my constant rock, helping me repaint my living room from a somber gray to a hopeful light blue. Each brushstroke felt like a cleansing act, covering over the lingering ghosts of deception. In the end, Seth's betrayal taught me a profound lesson about distinguishing genuine need from manipulative tactics. Trust wasn't something to be handed over blindly, it had to be earned, tested, and safeguarded. But despite everything, I wasn't sorry for having cared. Compassion was still my strength, not a weakness. As I locked my front door one final time before heading to work, I felt a gentle reassurance in my heart. I was free from lies, free from secrets, and free to shape my future with unwavering honesty. Thank you for joining me on this journey through a story that started with trust and ended with the exposure of one man's hidden accounts. If you've made it this far, I hope you found some insight, maybe even a cautionary tale about recognizing red flags and protecting yourself from manipulative behavior. Sometimes, the people we think we know best are the ones harboring the darkest secrets. If this story resonated with you, or if you've experienced something similar, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please share your experiences or advice in the comments below. Your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. And if you want to stay updated on more stories like this, consider hitting that subscribe button and turning on notifications. It's the best way to make sure you never miss a new upload. Thank you again for being part of this community. Together, by sharing our stories and lessons learned, we grow stronger and more vigilant in protecting our hearts and our finances. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.